In this example, we're going to show you how you can import the vectors and calculate the vCarving toolpath to cut the bull's head sign that you can see here. We're also going to show you how you can make edits to the original design and recalculate the toolpath until we like the look of the toolpath preview. So let's go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. We can do that using this option here, and if I click on that, we're able to browse our system to locate files that we may want to bring in. In this case, we're looking at the Bull's Head project folder, and we're going to open the bullshead.dxf file, and then we could go ahead and press open. So what we have here is a vector file that was created in another drawing program. Now the software automatically sets the size of the job to the size of the largest object within that imported file. Now we're going to look at making this part bigger just to ensure that we have space around the actual part to cut around the job and space to hold the part down also. So to edit the size of our job, we simply come over to the job setup form, which is automatically opened up on the left hand side. So we are working with a single-sided job here. Now the job size, as I said, I'd like to alter that, so we're going to look at altering the width to begin with. We'll make that 12 inches wide, and we'll make the height of this 5 inches high. And you'll notice it's added height to the top, and it's added the width to the right hand side. And that's all down to the actual XY datum position. We can see it's currently set to the lower left here, and we'll come back to this in a minute. Then we need to specify material thickness, so 1/2 inch is what I plan to work with. The units that we're going to work with in this case is inches, so we'll keep that selected there. Next in the list is the Z0 position, and this is the position we're going to reference on the CNC machine with the tip of the tool to tell the software that that is Z0. Now because we're vCarving, we want to choose the material surface, as this is the best plane to reference from when we do something like a vCarve toolpath. You'll see if I switch between the two, we have this red indicator that also indicates as to where we're setting that Z0 in this image, which is always a useful reference. So let's just put that back to the material surface there. And then we move on to the XY datum position. Now when we open a vector file like this, the software will try to automatically position it relative to the coordinates it was saved from in the original file. And so it does that by using this offset value to move the XY0 position. So we can see currently the X0, Y0 is here. We can see that judging by these rule lines over here. Now if I don't need to keep that original location, then I can uncheck this, and then that will send X0, Y0 to the lower left hand corner indicated by this red square here, and we can see that we have the vertical rule here and we've got the horizontal rule there, and we know now that X0, Y0 is at the lower left hand corner of our overall job space. Design scaling, okay, so we're not scaling the design with our job size, so we're going to leave that unchecked. Modelling resolution, I don't need to worry about this as I don't intend to bring in any 3D data into this example. We're just working purely with vectors and toolpaths in this case. So once we've got our setup all correct how we want it to, we could go ahead and press OK. So now that we've imported that file, we've set up the job, and everything is set from the lower left, what I would like to do is move all of the vectors that we've got here into the centre of our job. So to do that, I need to look at selecting them all. And there's various ways that I can select all the vectors. One way is by holding down Shift and selecting the vectors. Okay, as we have quite a lot here, it's probably a lot easier for me to use the drag box method, whereby I can just simply click in the space and then drag a box, so you can see that box, and then everything that is within my box will be selected once I let go of the left mouse button. Okay, so dragging from the top down to the bottom right selects everything within that box. Another way that we could do this is by box selecting in reverse, where we drag from the bottom right up to the top left, and in this case what will happen is everything within that selection that touches that will be selected like so. Okay, another way we can do this is just by simply going to Edit, Selection, and we can select all vectors or press Ctrl A on the keyboard and that will select them all. And so with them all selected, we need to come over to this icon here, which will enable us to align the selected objects to particular positions within our job. So if we click on that, you'll see we have various options here. As I said, we just want to move this to the center of our material. So we're going to use this option here, and I'll align that both vertically and horizontally to our material, and you'll see there it's now in the center. So let's just close that down. Now I would like to make some further edits to this design for the bull's head sign, but I'll come back to that shortly, as I'd like to just show you how quickly we can create a toolpath for this part. Now if your vectors are the correct size and in the correct position, then we can just use the option at the top here to switch over to the toolpath commands. So by clicking that, that'll just temporarily close out of the design tabs, and then over to the right here you'll see that the toolpaths tab have been opened up on the right hand side, and this is where we can attach toolpath information to the vectors and simulate how our part will look on the CNC. Now the first and most important thing we need to do is set up our material. So this is where we relate the virtual setup in the software to that of the physical setup on the machine. So we're going to use this set option here, and really we're just checking over this, we're just verifying that the information we set up before is correct for when we come to machine this. Now if I just press cancel, now I could have just checked over the settings in this visual preview here, but as a beginner user it's best to get into the habit of checking over all of the settings that we can see here in the actual material setup form. So here we're going to work with a material thickness that is 1/2 inch. XY datum position is going to be set in the lower left hand corner, Z0 will be set to the material surface. Model position in material, now this only concerns projects with 3D data inside. We're not going to use any 3D data in this example, but many of the other tutorials cover this in much more detail. Then we move on to rapid Z gaps above material. Now these are values that are used for the tool to retract to before it moves to the next position in the toolpath. So the important thing here is to ensure that these values are high enough that the tool will clear any clamping or hold down methods that we may be using. Then we go on to the home and start position. So this is just a value that I enter to give the software a location to move the tool to before we start the cut. Once you're content with the settings there, you can just go ahead and press OK. And so the toolpath that we're going to look at using for this sign is the V-carve toolpath. I need to ensure that all of our vectors that we want to V-carve are selected, and I can still see that those vectors are still currently selected there, indicated by the pink dashed lines. Now with those selected, we need to come over to the V-carve toolpath, which is located under toolpath operations, and it's this icon here, the V-carve engraving toolpath, and if I click on that, that will open up the V-carve engraving toolpath form. And so the first thing we need to do is specify our cutting depths. The first option we need to look at here is our start depth. So the start depth for our part is going to be on the material surface, which is going to be at 0. And so the tool is going to go down as deep as it can get all the way to the point of the tool, and that will depend on the width of the vectors and the actual angle of the tool itself. So what we need to do now is select a tool. So the next section below the cutting depths is the actual tool selection. At the moment we can see we currently have a V-bit 90 degree 1¼ inch tool. To access the tools, we simply use the select option here, and that will open up the tool database. And so here is what we call our tool database, which is basically a library of tools. Now you have a standard set and you have the ability to edit and create new tools that you may have but aren't currently in the database. You could look at making multiple copies of tools, or you could alter the settings for each dependent on the material you're using and your applications. Now in this case, I'd like to use a 90-degree half-inch V-bit. So come down to the V-bit section here. If you found that you couldn't see the tools here, it's probably because it's closed and you need to click on this plus icon here, which will open up the V-bits within your tool database. So here I can see I've got a V-bit 90-degree half-inch there. I can just check over the settings, ensuring they're safe and appropriate for what I'm doing. And I could go ahead and press OK, and you'll see that our tool has now changed, and it's changed to the tool that we selected from that tool database. So moving down the form, we've got various options that are greyed out, and that's because we haven't got the flat depth option selected there. So working our way down the form, we're going to give our toolpath a name. So we're just going to call this one VCarve, and then we'll just call that one 90, just for our own reference, and that we're using a 90-degree V-bit tool. And we could simply just go ahead and press calculate. Okay, so it's calculated that extremely quickly there. And what it's done is it's automatically opened up the preview toolpath form on the right hand side, and it automatically puts me in the 3D view. And this is where I can see the toolpath represented by the blue lines, and I could look at simulating the toolpath being cut in this virtual block of material that we've got here. So this toolpath has been drawn for us in the 3D view, and this literally represents the coordinates the software is going to tell the tool to move to in order to carve out the sign. And this is very useful for me to see the actual paths displayed here, but it's more useful for me to visualize the actual cutout simulation, and that's what this preview toolpath function is for. So starting at the top, we have the option to specify the actual material that we preview this in. And if I just click on Beach Dark, you'll see it displayed with a list of all kinds of woods that we've got loaded into the software, metals, stones, and various miscellaneous plastics that we've got here. You also have the option to use a solid colour, and if you wanted to, you could use your own bitmap by adding that into the actual folder itself. Now in this case, we're going to look at previewing this in Cherry. I have a nice piece of Cherry that I'd like to cut this sign out with. So we're going to use the Cherry preview, and you'll see it's updated that there in the 3D view. Then when we come to actually preview the toolpath, we can choose how the machined area colour is displayed, whether that's the material colour or various colours that we can choose from. In this case, we're just going to go with the actual material colour here, just to get a raw indication of what our part would look like if we was to cut that out. We have the option here to animate the preview, whereby we can look at drawing the tool. So for this example, we are going to have draw tool switched on, just so we can see the exact simulation when we come to actually preview this toolpath here in our block of virtual wood. So here we're just going to change the slider so that the speed of this is going to be somewhere around the middle, just so we can see how the tool is going to move around our job, which can be very useful to see the moves in the software before actually creating the part in the CNC. So let's just go ahead and use this option here to preview that toolpath. And so we can see that tool, you can see it's just working its way around the part. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and just speed up that simulation, and you can see there it's finished simulating that part, and we can see exactly how this part is going to look if we was to cut that out using the settings we had in our toolpath on our CNC machine. And so we can see the exact shape that we're going to get here on our CNC machine. And this is very important. If I think that this looks right here at this stage, I can go away with confidence, save out the toolpath, and know it should look like this if I set everything correctly on my CNC. Now if something doesn't look right at this stage, I have the option to fix it before wasting any time or material in cutting this part, and that's why it's vital to check over the actual toolpath preview here. Now going back to the actual colours that we can add to our part, what we can do is look at adding in a contrasting colour if I wanted to. And so what I could do is use this global fill colour option, and you'll see we currently have yellow selected there, and I'll just fill all the areas that we've cut away in this yellow colour. And so this just gives me the effect as if our part was gilded. And so it's just a really nice way for us to really get a good representation of the part that we're going to get, even when we come to finishing the part by painting it up, for instance. Now, as well as this preview being useful for me, I can use this as a marketing aid where I can save out the preview image. So if we use this option here, we have the option to save this out in various different image formats. And then what we can do with that is we can just go and send that over to our customer as proof, or I can even use this for images in a portfolio or put them on my website and ultimately show people the capabilities that we have with a CNC. Now, even though we are explaining the steps to create this sign in a lot of detail, you can see how quickly it is to open the vector file, alter the job setup, and select all the vectors and center them to the center of our material. Take those vectors, switch over to the Toolpath tab, where we double check over that material setup, and then actually create the toolpath, calculate it, and previewing it here. And we could have, in theory, have got to this stage within 1 minute of starting. So now I'd like to show you how you'd save this data into a format that your CNC machine would understand. So once you're happy with the preview that you can see here, we can close that. With our toolpath selected, we're going to go over to Save Toolpath. So here we can see that the toolpath to be saved is the VCarve 90. Okay, so this is the toolpath we just created here. If you couldn't see anything listed in the toolpaths to be saved section, you may want to uncheck the option to output all visible toolpaths to one file. So with that in our list of toolpaths to be saved, we then need to choose an appropriate post-processor. And this post-processor will format the data for that particular machine or the control software that it runs. So you need to choose one from the list. If you just click on that option there, you'll see we've got lots of different post-processors available. You need to choose one that is suitable for your machine. Now if you're not sure, you could talk to your machine manufacturer or Vectric support. And there are so many that most of the major machines are actually taken care of here, and you should find them in this list. So we're just going to use a generic G-code post here, and we're going to use this option here to save the toolpaths. So here we could give that a name, maybe something more appropriate to what you're doing. I think VCarve 90 seems quite self-explanatory there. So then I could just go ahead and simply save that part, and then we could just take that file over to the CNC and then set up my material, and then we can run the file to cut the sign that we can see here. So far we've seen the whole process here, from starting up with the vectors to something that you could physically go and take over to your CNC machine to carve out the bull's head sign. Now what I'd like to do is show you how we could make edits to the vectors that we have here, where I'd like to look at making edits to the actual border shape that we've got in our sign. So let's just close out the Save Toolpaths form. And I'm going to come up to this icon here where we're going to switch back over to the design commands. So if I click on that, that's just going to close my Toolpaths tab. And it's going to open up the design tabs, and you can see that we're currently in the drawing tab there. So let's go into the 2D view. So here are our vectors. Now what I'd like to do is I'd just like to remove the inner border vector that we've got. So I'm just going to click into the white space to deselect all of those vectors that we had in that selection there. Then I'm going to click on the vector that represents the inner border, and this is the vector that I'd like to remove. And with that selected, I'm simply going to press the delete key on the keyboard, and that's going to delete that for me. So now we're going to select this vector here that represents the border. We've got a rectangle vector. With that selected, let's go into the Draw Rectangle tool to edit the shape of this rectangle. So at the moment I can see the current width and the height. I'd like to round this up, and before I change that I just want to make sure that my anchor point is set to the centre of the rectangle there, so that when we alter the size it sets that about the actual centre of the rectangle. So here we're going to give that a width of 11 and we're going to give that a height of 4 inches, and then we could just simply go ahead and press apply and we'll see that that's been updated there. If I wanted to, I could give the rectangle shape a little bit more of an interesting shape by altering the corner type. So for example, I could give this radius external corner, give that a radius of 1/2 inch, press apply there. You'll see we've got rounded corners for our sign. Another one we could do is look at radius internal. So this will give me quite a decorative look, an old style sign shape, having those radius internal corners there. Again, we'll go 1/2 inch. We could go ahead and press apply there, and you can see the actual shape that we've created there just by editing the width and the height and by altering the corner type. Okay, so I'm happy with that, so we could go ahead and close out of that form. And so with this newly edited shape that we've got selected here, I'd like to create another vector based on this shape, whereby we're going to create an offset. So with that selected, let's come over to the offset selected vectors. We're going to offset that inwards. I'm going to specify a distance here of 0.2, and then make sure that create sharp offset corners is switched on, and then we could go ahead and use the offset option, and you'll see it's created that second border for us there, which is 0.2 of an offset from the original outer vector. So let's just close that down. And so there are lots of tools that we can use to create shapes, edit shapes, where we have a set of very powerful design tools to create vectors from scratch or edit existing artwork like we've done here. So now that we've got our newly created border, we can go over and then recalculate our vCarve toolpath to accommodate the new border that we've just created here. So up to the top of the design tab, we're going to use this option here to switch over to the toolpath commands. And so to edit an existing toolpath, we simply have that selected and then use the edit toolpath option, and you'll see there it's picked up all the vectors that we used previously. Now because we've created a new vector, we need to add that into our selection, so I can do that by simply holding down Shift and clicking on that vector to select it. And so there we can just use the option to calculate that. It's going to calculate it. You can reset this preview by using this button here, so we can see the toolpath there. Put it in the ISO view, and then we'll just go ahead and preview that toolpath and put the speed up to the max there. So there we have our newly created border. We can see how that looks, and I think it looks a lot better than the simple rectangle that we had previously. Now looking at the actual bull's head text, just by visually taking into account where it's positioned, it looks as though it's more over to the right hand side. Now we know that this text is in the centre of our job, and it's probably something to do with the actual flourish shape that we've got next to the letter B here. So even though the part is mathematically in the centre, sometimes that doesn't always mean it's going to look correct visually. So we just need to look at doing some manual editing and tweaking and positioning of where this text actually sits within the overall shape of our border. So to do that, let's just close out of the preview toolpath. We're just going to switch back over to the design tab and go straight into the 2D view. Now I only want to look at moving the vectors that represent the bull's head text, so I don't want to look at moving the border vectors. So to deselect those, I'm just going to hold down Shift and then just select them one at a time, and you'll see that we've now deselected them. So with the text that we have selected, we could look at moving that over into a position that looks more central compared to the actual border itself. So with the vector selected, one way of doing this is we could come over to transform objects and we could look at moving the selected objects. Okay, so let's put it into transform mode, and here I have the ability to move that text that's currently selected over to an absolute position, or we could move it to a position that's relative to where it currently stands. In this case, we're going to move this relative, and we're going to move this by 1/4 of an inch in the x-axis. I've put negative in front of that number so it comes over to the left. So when I go ahead and press apply, you can see that that's moved that for me over 1/4 of an inch in the x-axis. Now that actually looks quite okay. Now if we just close out there, and we could also click the selected text to put it into transform mode and look at moving this dynamically. Sometimes it's easier to see where we want to position this just by moving the part around. I could use the arrow keys if I wanted to nudge things over, and if I wanted to make use of the actual handles here, we could look at sizing this. For example, I could take this handle here, hold down shift, and we're just going to scale that out in proportion about the centre there, and then I could just look at nudging that over to the right a little, and you'll see that we're just constantly getting feedback from how our part is positioned within the actual overall composition. And this really is a subjective opinion to how and when the actual part looks finished. Okay, so I'm happy with what we've got there. So what we could do is we could look at recalculating this. So let's go back over, switch over to the toolpaths. And so another way to edit a toolpath is to just double click on the toolpath in the list there. So you can see all of those vectors are highlighted, and we could just go ahead and calculate that. Again, let's go ahead and reset that preview, and then we could just preview that toolpath. And so there I can see it looks a lot better. I'm happy with the change that we made there. And it's very important that your part looks correct at this stage. As you've seen, we've made several iterations to this part and previewing those changes until we like the look of the preview. And the toolpath preview shows you an accurate representation of what we would see on our CNC machine if we was to go ahead, save out these toolpaths and run them on our machine. So if something doesn't look as you wanted it here at this stage, you can, as you've seen in this example, go back and make edits to the vectors or the toolpaths and recalculate them until you are satisfied with the results that you see here in the toolpath preview. And that's what makes the toolpath preview such a powerful tool. So at this stage we'd go ahead and close that preview toolpath, save the toolpath out, and then just go ahead, save that out to our machine, and then we could simply cut that file. Now I'm not going to save that in this case, but what I am going to do is save the actual file so that we have the file that we can come back to if we wanted to make changes to it in the future. To do that, let's go to File, Save As, and we're going to call this one Bull's Head Getting Started, and we'll save that, and you can access that from the project folder.